It's time for Ryuki. Oh boy. So, Agito's, well, one of Agito's biggest claims to fame is that it's the first series to have multiple writers, totaling 4. But Ryuki's big claim to fame as a series is having the most writers to date at 13, counting some movie and special exclusive writers. Either way, Ryuki has the most original writers in any series to date. Another thing is, this is the first Kamen Rider series written by Yasuko Kobayashi, who's a pretty prolific writer for Toei. She's written multiple seasons of, well, Kamen Rider, as well as multiple seasons of Super Sentai. Famously, Shinkenger, the season of Power Rangers that was Samurai, and Go Busters, the season in Power Rangers that's Beast Morphers. So it's interesting to see her origins as a, well, not particular origins. I think she maybe wrote a Sentai before this one, but her more prolific origins in working for Toei here. Oh, she also is one of the head writers on the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime. So that's interesting. Now, let's dive into the plot and examine the work, shall we? 13 card decks have been created for the use of 13 Kamen Riders, using the power of a mysterious mirror world, a parallel world where only Kamen Riders and monsters exist. The Riders draw upon the power of these monsters to, well, feel their power and fight in the mirror world, heeding the call of the deck's creator, because only one rider can remain. The riders must fight and kill each other, and the only remaining rider can get a single wish granted, thus beginning the Rider War. Amongst all of this, a young reporter named Shinji Kido finds himself embroiled in the events of the Rider War after getting his hands on the Ryuki card deck. Thus begins Shinji's struggle as a rider during the Rider War, as he tries to find out what it means to be a Kamen Rider. Let's question that for a minute. What does it mean to be a Kamen Rider? I've heard Ryuki be called the death of classical Kamen Rider, the idea that only heroes are Kamen Riders. And I honestly need to stop saying the word Kamen Rider, little phrase. Anyway, Ryuki, on a classical definition, is the death of the original meaning of the word or words Kamen Rider. From here on, anyone can be a Kamen Rider. Villainous people, outright evil people, not even exclusively heroes. Sometimes our main riders aren't exclusively heroes until the very end of the story, if ever. Pontificating. Anyway, so, in a sense, this is the classical death of the idea of Kamen Riders. Not to say if that's a good or a bad thing. It's really how you look at it, depending on the viewer. Anyway, my personal opinion is that, while this death of Kamen Rider, it's the start of a trend examining what it means to be a Kamen Rider, which a lot of series do from here on out. Like, a lot of series spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it means for their various characters to be Kamen Riders. Not to say if that's a good or a bad thing. It's, again, up to personal opinion. So, before we dive deep into something that, well, the various things that annoy me about this show, let's talk about some good things first. The opening, specifically the opening theme. I haven't really talked about music yet, but Kamen Rider has a lot of good music in it, especially a lot of original songs and themes and whatnot. Anyway, in the case of Ryuki, we have Alive Alive, the opening track for Ryuki, and I generally enjoy this song. Kuga and Agito had their own opening themes and songs and whatnot, but this is the first one that I've generally enjoyed, with how it uses synth in the guitar in order to bring a somewhat unearthly feel. That's during the whole mirror world and everything. If you ever get a chance to listen to it, which is pretty easy, I'm pretty sure there are like 5 different versions of this thing on YouTube, I recommend you take a peek and listen. Or, well, reach out your ear and listen to it. Another thing I want to mention are the visuals for the OP. I honestly don't watch the visuals very much often after the first few times. But, one thing I will praise this opening for are the various shots of random people holding up the cards of the Advent decks, or the various card decks. It's a really cool scene, really cool images, especially considering that everyone has their face obscured. It's a cool visual signifier that anyone can be a rider, or an enemy in this Rider War. It's a cool way to use the idea of a common or masked rider. See what I did there? It's generally an excellent use of the idea, building up the paranoia for our main characters. Anyway, let's talk about suits real quick. Unfortunately, because of the number of different riders in this series, all the suits of Ryuki kinda are kind of uniform to each other. Like in a lineup of suits, you can tell which ones are the Ryuki suits because they all have a similar look to them. I'd say that's a bad thing. They're really only differentiated by their color and animal motif. I'd say that's a bad thing, but it does make the suit kind of bland when it's in a lineup of, the other suits in Ryuki. It's like, oh, which one's Ryuki? Oh, it's the red one with the dragon helmet. Speaking of that dragon, Ryuki is our first main rider to not have a bug motif. Like, Kuga and Agito had bug motifs, and Kamen Rider is famous for all the previous riders in the Showa era having bug motifs in their designs, but Ryuki is the first rider to not have a bug motif, instead having a dragon or Ryu motif in his suit. In fact, Ryuki, I believe one translation of it is Dragon Knight, because he's a dragon knight. Pretty cool there. Our secondary rider for the series, Kamen Rider Knight, ironically, has a bat and a knight motif, and it works well for him, especially around the helmet area. He also can basically be Kamen Rider Batman when he has the cape on. Although I will mention one thing I find odd about the suits, and that's the grate over the eyes. Like, all the suits have this grate over, have like these lines of the helmet are grate over their eyes, and it's kind of weird. Like, I get what they're going for. It's supposed to be like a knight's helmet, so they have the grates to cover up the eyes, because knights had grates over their eyes to protect their eyes from various things. But in this case, it feels like it's doing more to obscure the vision than anything else. Like, it feels weird, especially considering how sometimes some of the parts of the suit seem to pop out, like especially the eyes bug out. And so it feels weird that they have to have the extra lighting. The only one I think this works on is Knight's suit, due to the fact you can't really tell. Like, unless you look closely at the suit, you don't see the eyes, so you can honestly believe they aren't there, so it kind of works a bit better in his case. But in other cases, especially Ryuki's, it feels really weird. Okay, so what I don't like about this series, it's honestly the Rider War concept that it uses. On paper, it's a big epic clash between 13 riders, but considering the fact that they have to stretch out a fight between 13 individuals for 50 episodes, something has to give, and that's the Rider War. The riders themselves barely fight each other, and even when we do see them fight, it's mostly just one-on-one fights. At most, we'll get 3 riders fighting. We barely have over 5 riders on screen at a time. It's a disappointment when you'd expect to see a ton of riders fighting each other all the time, considering the concept of the show and the basic idea of a rider war. And onto that, it's Shinji. I honestly don't like Shinji Kido. He's painted as an optimist who believes in other people and believes in the good in people even when they do evil things, and the Rider War confronts that general belief in others. But it doesn't feel like that when you watch the show. It feels like Shinji basically spends the entire series debating on whether or not he can fight or kill people during the Rider War, which honestly, on a paper, that's a good idea, but in practice, it's not really well done. He flip-flops so much about whether he can fight this person or that person, or whether it's right for him to fight other people and steal away their wishes, or whether it's right for him to stop the Rider War at all, considering the various risks that the riders take participating. One thing is that if they don't fight and fight monsters, their contract beasts will kill them and eat them for food. So they can either fight monsters or have their monsters eat people to fulfill their contracts and whatnot. And that's a risk that the riders take participating. And he doesn't know if he's right to stop them from doing such things. Ultimately, he does get his act together at the very end of the series. I really don't want to make this joke, considering it's the obvious joke, considering his name is Shinji, but Shinji, get in the Rider War. I honestly think Shinji and Evangelion has a lot more shit on them for that, but Shinji and Eva has a lot more to deal with than Shinji in this series, and I just feel there's no comparison. Like, there's a minor comparison, but it's not much of a good one. Let's talk about another thing. The idea of the wish. So, the main villain of the series, his whole goal is to monopolize the wish, but he's also the one who made the card decks. And, well, it feels like he's a very bad at planning this thing. Like, it would just be easy just to grab a bunch of random psychos, which some of the writers feel like random psychos at times, especially Kamen Rider Oja, the guy with the purple snake, who's probably one of my favorites for his suit, and the fact he's a psychopath, because he seems like he's having fun on screen. That's kind of fun. Anyway, his whole goal was to monopolize the one wish to save his sister, Yui, but it feels like he's doing a terrible job at it, especially when you remember, because I keep emphasizing this, at the end of the series, there's a time limit. There's a time limit on the Rider War, and he's pressed for time, and he has less than a year to get this done. And it feels like he's dragging his feet throughout the whole series getting this Rider War going. Now, on top of that, how does the mirror world even work? From what we understand, there aren't mirror people there, but mirror people show up. We have 2 mirror people and nothing else. It's just a world full of monsters. On top of that, we're led to believe that one of the characters created the mirror world because she mentions that she drew it when she was a child. And did you create the mirror world, or were you just attached to it when you were a kid? Because we have so many questions about how the mirror world works, and yet we have no answers. How do you even get the wish? How do you even make the decks from a mirror world? I mean, I can understand the idea of sealing a monster in a card, but how does that create a Rider deck? I mean, sealing monsters in cards sounds like another series later on, hint hint, but still. There's a lot of questions the series just refuses to answer, and it's kind of irritating. Like, really irritating. Let me go over something I actually like again, and that is our secondary writer, Ren Akiyama, aka Kamen Rider Knight. Ren's story is generally a pretty good one. He wants the wish to save his girlfriend who fell into a coma. He struggles with the idea of if it's right to kill others for this goal. I mean, it helps that most, if not all, the other writers, aside from him and Shinji, are kind of psychopaths, so it makes the choice a lot easier. He generally has a good story and a good conflict, and steals more of the show than Shinji. There's a real reason why he's noted as probably one of the best secondary writers, and that's it. Honestly, most of the writers just tend to mess around, and only a handful of them are actually serious about the fight. Most of them are murderers, like Kamen Rider Scissors' guy. But there's actually an interesting thing about him. So basically, he effectively uses the masked Rider idea because he hides his identity. Like, at first he pretends to be one dude, but he actually killed that dude and stuffed him in the walls of his place, and he was basically just pretending to be him the whole time until he comes up again later on and he's killed by his contract beast because he forgot to feed it. Like, it's a clever use of the idea of a masked rider. Another one, I mentioned him earlier, Oja, Takashi Sakura, the Kamen Rider Oja. He's fun to be on screen. He's just a murderer. He's really into the Rider War because he just wants to kill people. There's a whole subplot about this thing with his family, how he murdered his family in a fire and his younger brother escaped, and they think that can redeem him. But no, he just wants to murder his whole family. He just wants to kill his brother again, and it's kind of fucked up. And he's kind of fun watching him be fucked up. Also, this series has another first. Kamen Rider Femme, kind of on the nose there, is the first female Kamen Rider in the entire franchise. She also starts the tradition of female Kamen Riders being murdered in the shows, or at least dying at some point in the series. In her case, she's murdered because she starts off in the movie, she gets murdered in the same movie. It's kind of sad because she has a really cool story. Like, she wants to kill Oja because Oja killed her sister, and she gets to fight him, and it's a really cool fight. And then she's narked by Ryuki. Ryuki also starts another tradition of black recolors of our main rider, because he's Mirror Shinji, and that's confusing because mirror world and all that stuff. But anyway, she's brutally murdered, and she just, like, her death scene is really kind of sad because she's just on the ground, people just walking by, she slowly dies in the grass, and it's just a sad scene, and probably not the worst female rider death, but it's up there. I mean, Valkyrie in 01 still hasn't died yet, if she'll die in 01. We're in late game now, so she might not die, so she might be the first one to break the curse. Anyway, overall, Kamen Rider Ryuki is okay. I won't say it's out and out bad. I can see why people would enjoy it, but it doesn't use the idea of a Rider War effectively. I think another season down the line would use the idea a lot better, even it's further down the line than all the other mentions I've been doing throughout this course of stuff. Anyway, it starts a handful of traditions for the franchise. It's the first series to have the more modular belts. I kind of mentioned that back in Agito, how Agito was the last series to have the standard belts. This is the first series to have the modular belts, because they pull their cards, because they use their card decks to transform, and they pull their cards out of the deck in their belt and slide it into their various things to use weapons, special skills, summon their contract beast, finishers, all that kind of stuff. So it starts a handful of traditions, all that kind of good stuff. It has some concepts that are pretty good, but it doesn't use them effectively. And before anyone mentions it, I won't begin into Ryuki's various multiple endings. Ryuki's infamous for having so many weird, different, contradicting endings. It's kind of confusing to find out which one's actually canon. But the real canon one is the one where it never happened. They go back in time and stop the Rider War from ever happening. And it feels cheap and tacked on, because it is. And it's just kind of dumb. Honestly, Ryuki, it feels like a waste. Basically, I feel this show could have been told in a much shorter format. A shorter, more focused format. And think about that for a second. Hold on to the idea. For around 17 years, not now, but if you were watching Ryuki back when it aired, 17 years, the idea of a more shortened and condensed version of Ryuki's Rider War. That's interesting, isn't it?